Howdy guys. Okay, everybody uses these kinds of temperature probes, especially when you're home brewing or if you work in the oven or anything like that. They all come from China and they all cost, a couple bucks on a temperature controller, but they all suffer from one problem. If you're going to use them in a liquid, the control always goes straight down this pipe, and the pipe is crimped to keep the wire from pulling out because the thermistor is way down here in the bottom. But the problem is, if this tube fills up with all kinds of crap, like if you're a homebrewer like me and you get wort in there, that's sugar water and it's terrible. And these things last 3 or 4 immersions and then they die. If they get in any kind of boiling water, or if they get into your soup or anything, if you're cooking, it's too hot in your crock pot, water gets in there and it's bad. So I'm going to show you real quick how to fix that guy. You really just need, now I'm a little overprotective, so I use 2 sizes of heat shrink. You could probably get away with 1. But I like to do 2, belt suspenders kind of guy. So I'm going to make a little section of the white right over the top of that joint, and I'm going to make a slightly longer section of the red that covers up it and the wire as well. The other thing I'm going to be using is some ultra black high temp RTV silicone gasket maker. Almost any kind of silicone gasket maker will work here as long as it's got silicone and it's not designed for really low temperature operations. Any temperature that it can find in an engine is going to be plenty high for you to be able to put into boiling water. Now if you're going to cook something really hot in the oven, you want to make sure that you use real silicone stuff here, especially the high temp. If you're going to be using this temperature controller while you're roasting, anything that gets into the 400, 500 degrees, you got to make sure you use the ultra black. But if you're just going to use it for boiling water, whatever, blue or any of the other temperature ones work great, as long as it's real silicone. It's not going to come in contact with your food at all. It's just as a kind of a special, extra way of sealing that guy up. The next thing we're going to need is a lighter. If you have a heat gun, that's a whole lot better. If you haven't ever done this before, I would recommend practicing on a little of your heat shrink until you get an idea how much heat it'll take before it starts to melt. Usually it's not very much, so you got to kind of be real careful with it. I'll show you how that works. So let's get to it. It's real easy. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pack a little of that RTV in there. I've tried to do it a million zillion different ways, but none of them work quite as well as a little dab on the end of your finger. And you don't need much, maybe half a pea. Okay, because what you're going to want to do is very careful. You only want to get this right at the joint here and not any further up there than you have to. Now what I usually do is try to just kind of keep packing it up and working it down into that pipe a little bit. You just want it right there near the joint. Doesn't need a ton of it, but you got to make sure it goes down to the crimp. Try to kind of pack it in there down to the crimp. Now this stuff hardens up. It never gets really solidly hard, so there's always a little bit of flex in it, but I like to make sure it's as full as possible so that it doesn't have anywhere to wiggle out to as it's being used. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's all down in there pretty well. You'll need a little bit of a rag or something to wipe that off. Won't hurt if you want to wipe a little bit off out here, especially if you've got any much far from the joint. I usually leave it right around the joint, but if you got any blobs on your wire or anything, kind of get up close to the joint like that and just make sure it's off of there. Okay? Now while that's still wet is when you want to do this. So I like to cut off just about enough to cover the crimp and a little bit, plus about the same amount in the other direction. So I'm going to cut off about that much of the white, and then for the red I want it to stick out a little bit on both sides. So I want to cut off about not much for the red. See, it's pretty close. Whoops. So test fit everything. Make sure before you start this, it'd be a good idea to make sure that your heat shrink tubing actually goes around the bend. If it doesn't, you might need to revisit it, and it goes over the crimp. I already double checked this, so I know that it does. Helps if you twist a little bit as you slide it up there. It'll pull that goop down inside. If you just shove it, a lot of times it'll push it out of the way, but if you twist it, see a little bit as I'm going here, it'll wrap it right up. Now you want to kind of figure out where that was and get it kind of down in the middle there. Now you can see where the crimp is here, so I'm on each side of the crimp. We got a little bit on each side. It won't seal right in the crimp because it's got indentations and stuff in it that the seal doesn't work. So make sure you've got a good quarter to an eighth to a quarter of an inch on this side, and you want about the same over there. Now the secret with doing this on the thing is really short amounts and never overheat it. So start your flame out here. It's a little bit of a fan going because it's hot as heck in my garage. And you just want to kind of pass that underneath there real quick. Okay, and give it time to react. Switch sides very frequently. If it starts to get brown like that, stop immediately. It only takes a half a second under each one. See, and that's about how tight it'll get. Now see, it's a little bit loose up here still. So only on this end, I want to give it a little more shrinkies and make sure you work from both sides. Like I said, a hot air blowing gun or something, way better. I got one, it's on a shelf over there. I don't feel like getting it because I'm good with the lighter. Practice. Now this guy I want to get up just in exactly the same way. Just going to put him right over the top of both of those. This is just kind of a little extra, also a little strain gauge. Now see how it gets stuck here a little bit? This is where twisting it helps as well. So kind of get a feel for where that is on even on both sides and then shrink-a-dink it. Always flipping both sides. Let it heat up evenly if possible. It'll only shrink a small amount in each spot. So you got to make sure you heat it all the way around. Otherwise one side will shrink and the other side won't. And it'll be loose. Or it'll split because you shrunk one side too far. Now you see that line right there? I don't know if you can see it. That tells me it's good and tight. Same thing over here. I want to see that on the small end. That's hard to do with the big one. Okay. I've debated sometimes about putting a little more silicone here. A little more of the silicone glue on the end of the white one just so that end of the red seals. But the truth is I haven't had much of a problem. Usually that white one seals up nice and tight with the silicone in there. A few of the ones I've done this way, 5 years I got out of that thing, probably 50 boils. So, you know, they usually start dying for me back here on this end long before they start dying on this end. And that's all it really takes. I buy these big giant packs of colored heat shrink tubing. They're at the China Mart, you know, or whatever. They're a couple bucks, $4 or $5. They got every size you'll ever need. They had white in here. They had black. Everything goes in there. You know, so it's more than you'll need for any kind of project like this. But it's way better than electrical tape. So keep using heat shrink tubing whenever you can. And that's all it takes. That seals it up. I've got the other ones like that. They've lasted years and years and years. So do that whenever you want to seal off these things and make them last so you can use the cheap ones again and again.